So what is happening this week in the world of European VC? I think a lot. And today we're joined by Lomax and my beautiful partner, Mads. We have on the docket, I'm going to tell a little personal story up front first. I want to share something and then get some thoughts from the gents in the room. Then some startup news, and there's a lot of that this week, and some really positive news. And then a bit more of the macro, big picture, behind the scenes stuff that's going to affect us in the future. But first up, welcome, Lomax. What's happening with you?
Me back. I'm very happy to be here. All is good. Deals getting done. Founders doing great. Family all well. Everything's good, man. Boom. Everything's up and to the right, you know. So good.
Up and to the right, like our logo. I love it. There you go. Not too obvious. So first up, I just wanted to share a little personal story. So this week, I went and had a full body scan with Nico Health. So this is the startup that was started by Daniel Ek and his co-founder of Spotify fame. And I was a little dubious, to be fair. I've always thought of Daniel Ek as quite a slick, smooth operator, and I didn't think he would do anything that was too half-rate. And boy, was I wrong. This is nowhere near any of my lower expectations or old man misery cynicism. This was an incredible experience. So what it is, it's a full body scan. So they do bloods, they do skin and molds, they do cardiovascular, they do blood pressure, they do all of the health markers, or most of the health markers. I think there's 70 in total. And they take millions of data points. And the whole experience was utterly incredible. And I highly recommend, if you get on the wait list or if you can nag somebody for a code, I would highly recommend it. Only 2 sites, one in London, one in Stockholm, so quite difficult to get in because it's quite limited space. But I wanted to share the personal experience and get your reflections on the space, but also have a chat about what would this mean for startups? Is this going to be a new kind of renaissance of health tech? I mean, looking back through up to 21, UK health tech attracted nearly 4 billion in VC funding. Out of, I think on that year, I think it was 11.5 billion in total. There's a massive chunk of money going into health tech. And it positioned the UK as the 3rd largest market, just behind US and China. So open to the floor. What's your thoughts on this kind of health scanning tech? Will this kind of reinvigorate a renaissance for startups and other things happening? And I guess the biggest question is, will this at some point cross over into the NHS? Because I personally believe that preventative health scanning is the future of healthcare. But Mads, I know you think a lot about this space. Do you want to kick off? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I probably don't have as much to say as Lomax on it, but as you've thrown me in here in the deep end, you know, I've always been a data kraken, right? I love data, I love time series, so I've always had kind of the Fitbits, the Apple Watches, the
you're wearing two. You've got the Whoop and the Apple Watch, so you're getting double whammied.
Give me all the time series. I want all the data all the time. And I love this stuff. And of course, it's the future of healthcare, and health technology is the way we're going to transform this and make it better. You kind of seen the opposite story, right? The United States, where you've spent more and more and more on healthcare every year with almost seemingly worse outcomes, which is just a nuts way to do things. Whereas what we really need is to be, much more effective at applying technology, spotting things early, do preventative stuff. So all that stuff makes sense. There is a slight cynic in me that sort of says, look, some of this stuff is not that hard. We know what we need to do. We need to eat better food,
drink more water, avoid the booze, don't smoke,
right? And I think sometimes, as kind of especially us data krakens, we can get a little busy with busying ourselves about measuring all this stuff. And actually, what we should be doing is, put on the trainers and go out for a run. Go to the gym and eat better food. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. But that said, yes, of course, this is the future of healthcare. We should be using technology much better.
Do you ever follow Brian Johnson? He spends about $3 million a year doing all of the health hacks, all of the tracking, and it's quite an eye opener to follow him on YouTube. I mean, I didn't enjoy his kind of persona at first, and then I got to know him a little bit through his content. I thought, you know what, all power to you. and sharing his journey. I mean, he shares very intimate secrets that I won't mention now. But Lomax, what? I mean, you've had some health scares recently, and is this on your mind? Is this a good thing?
I've thought a lot about this, right? So the context here is that a year and a half ago I was diagnosed with late stage colorectal cancer, right? Despite being one of the fittest people that I know. I was a sub 3 hour marathon runner, ultra marathon runner, looked after my health, didn't really drink, didn't smoke, ate well, and still had this like quite killer, shocking late stage diagnosis from which, just to context here, if you get stage 4 colorectal cancer, you have a 15% chance of surviving 5 years, right? Now, so it's a pretty scary thing to get in your 30s. Now, the reason why all of what you just said resonates with me is because 3 years ago, I'd thought of going to do the full body MRI. There are companies that are doing like Ezra and a couple of others that offer that service. And I didn't, because there are a lot of doctors who are very against this, right? Because they're very worried about false positives. And they have a valid point, which is that, you go and do an MRI scan, which is a whole body scan. Well, if you do a full body MRI, the chances are you're going to come up, you're going to find a bunch of like lesions and tumors, like most of which will be benign. But then what happens is you need to both manage your own stress, but more importantly, the doctors need to make decisions about going in to do biopsies, which can be very invasive, right? Biopsies can involve it's almost like a surgical procedure where they go in to actually extract the cells from this, lump that they found within you. I mean, a friend of mine nearly died from having a biopsy just recently. So doctors talked me out of doing that. So ironically, had I done it, I might have picked up my tumor a couple of years earlier and I might have been in a much better space, So I think there's a very much like a personal, I think about this a lot. I think and Neko is priced, this is not an advert for Neko or Nico, but it seems priced incredibly well for 300 quid a year, or you can go and do this.
300 quid, yeah. And if you pre-book, it's 250. It's very, very low cost.
If you're in your 30s, 40s, or in life generally, what are the two biggest things most likely to kill you? Is cardiovascular or cancer, right? So if you can stay on top of those broadly in a kind of preventative, predictive way, it's a no-brainer. So with your own money, I really think that it's great that things like this are on the market, and actually at the price point, because the price point of the previous full body scans is more like 2,500, that kind of thing. So this is really game changing. I think Mads is right. Like a lot of this is very basic. I just did the Zoe UK tech startup. I just did that whole program.
How did you find it? That's the sugar monitoring, yeah? The glucose monitoring.
Amongst other things, they give you a continuous glucose monitoring, and then they look at a bunch of other things, like your microbiome. My conclusion from Zoe, having spent about 500 quid on that, right? So a lot more money almost, is I'm actually going to probably churn from it, and I think the churn on it is quite high. And the reason why is because exactly what Mads said, is that 90% of all of this is just the conclusion is eat more fiber, eat more greens, less red meat, a bit less alcohol. That's the conclusion. It's well, okay. I mean, I kind of already know that, and I can read a few blogs to get me to that point, So a lot of this is like common sense. The thing is, we call it common sense, but if you apply that across the population level, it's actually not common sense to people. I think there's a very low hanging fruit in terms of educating people about these things, which don't require like a 500 quid app. Going back to Neko, I think it's very exciting from an investor point of view. Now, look, we've been investing in health tech a lot. We do about a third in health tech. We've been saying this for 10 years, yeah? And the problem is, as Mark Andreessen says, being early is the same as being wrong. And, we've been putting checks into preventative health for the last 10 years, and actually they've been too early because at the government level, these things are not being picked up. That's the biggest problem here. I think on the personal level, kind of in the 1% of people who are willing to pay out of pocket, there's a market for it. And that's why actually, there's premium offerings. To get governments to put money behind that, very hard. They only run screening programs in the case of cancer for lung cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer above 55. They run very, very, very limited programs because they need a lot of data. It's 52
now.
It's coming down to 52. And I think it should be 45. In the US, it's 45. And the point I'm saying is, for a government or big healthcare system to put money behind preventative like health, they need to see a lot of data and testing, and a lot of do the health economic studies, because you go and test a bunch of 40-year-olds, you find all of these these benign tumors, the government has to pay for all of the follow-ups, right? And actually that's very expensive. And those follow-ups are probably irrelevant. That's how they think about it. So
Well, I'm assuming that's why they don't. I mean, in
Yeah.
Japan, they've been doing preventative health. It's not mandatory, but I think they do guided annual screenings for everybody, every adult in Japan, and they've been doing that since the 70s. So I think there is. I think it's going to come. I wonder what the segue blocks are going to be to get the NHS to do this, because there will be some further technical advances in, maybe blood screening or other diagnoses, which will make the whole preventative health screenings a little bit more palatable.
Yeah, I mean, we have an investment. Just very quickly, we have an investment in a Theranos type product that actually works. Right, it's a capillary blood only,
Really?
15-minute turnaround.
He's not Forbes 30 under 30, is he? Or she?
Actually, luckily he hasn't. We wasn't tainted with that brush. But he actually has a working demo that he can, get on the show one day. It's very, very cool. And that's part of the future. You can just do, rather than sending bloods off to the lab, you can do it. Initially, it was a consumer go-to-market, but actually, you need to start within the hospitals to start with, I think. Anyway.
Well, I wish them every success. I think it's those kinds of things that will chip away at the ability for the NHS to then
But from
jump
a
the shark.
startup investment point of view, it takes a long time.
Well, maybe less. Maybe AI will slick on that. Maybe there'll be some more technical advances. Let's wait and see. I think this is a super exciting space and something that the UK already does extremely well. So I saw that the private equity, there's a whole world of money. It's over 53% now is of all of the health tech is now PE backed. So that's gone up by about 20% over the last couple of years. So there's a lot more to come through, especially on the UK side.
Well, health is 20% of US GDP. It's massive. So.
And their life expectancy is going down, right? Anyway, let's move on. It is on the 30th, so as of time of recording, tomorrow. So maybe when this goes out, it'll be yesterday. It's ChatGPT's birthday. ChatGPT is going to be 2 on the 30th of November. Now that feels like it's been around forever, and it's already embedded in our lives. I mean, nearly all of Fortune 500 companies use an OpenAI product. They have 220 million weekly active users. They reached 1 million users in 5 days. And here's an interesting fact that I didn't know. It costs about $1 million a day to run. So the question to the room is, has it improved your life? How do you use it? Who's going to win out of the LLMs, and what's coming next? So that's 4 questions in one for you. Mads, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, thanks for raising this one. I think it's such an exciting evolution we've seen over the last 2 years. As I wrote at the time, this changes everything. History really had a kind of a fork in the road, I think, on that launch. Kind of what happened was that OpenAI stole a march on Google. Google had the technology and was ahead of everybody in the world with the foundational research, but OpenAI was first to market. And then, Google was trying to catch up, but self-sabotaged with, too much working from home and too much woke confusion of what they are and who they are and what they were there to do.
You're going to upset the lefties, Mads.
Listen, I think, whoever you are and however you think about the world, if we want to win, we've got to be honest with ourselves about what works and what doesn't. And it's clear that Google is just way behind. I don't know if you remember kind of the issues they had around some of their generative image generators earlier in the year that they had to take off market because the stuff they put out was just so embarrassing. Now Anthropic and Elon Musk's XAI are going at it whole hog. Recently, Elon Musk was raising at $50 billion for his AI business, Anthropic at $40 billion. So it's amazing to see the competition, and I just hope it will last that way because it gives all of us, I think competition is really good, and it gives all of us this chance to see the space evolve so quickly. So the industry overall is still betting on OpenAI. It's by far the most valuable company in this space, more than $150 billion in valuation. They're clearly in the driving seats, 5 times the revenue of Anthropic, which is number 2. So, if you assess the other players, where are they strong? Anthropic probably a little bit more on the API load, so kind of using the Anthropic API. Developers are using it to build it into other apps, whereas OpenAI has got this huge, you call it a retail business, but actually it's also becoming a proper business, right, where companies, and I know we do it, folks are rolling it out to their teams to use on a day-to-day basis as part of running their companies. We're going to see more reasoning to your question, what's next? We're going to see more reasoning built in. Kind of the O1 model from OpenAI is incredibly powerful at solving really complicated things. We saw one PhD researcher saying, look, it replaced almost 2 years of work he'd done on his project. So it's incredible what these models are starting to create. There's still lots of teething issues. It's not solved yet, but that's the opportunity. More and more applications are being built on top, and there's a massive, massive impact in enterprise on the way. So that's how I see it. That's how I read it. I'm just really, really excited about this development here. So happy birthday, ChatGPT.
Happy birthday, ChatGPT. I didn't realize that they only kind of officially launched a stable release in August of this year. I don't know how that's measured or managed in any way, but I thought that was quite an interesting.
Gmail was in beta for 10 years, wasn't it?
Yeah, but that's because they didn't want to do any customer service, because the longer you stay in beta, the less promise you have to make to your customers, right? Lomax, what are you using on the LLM side? How does it affect your life? How does it affect your investment thinking? What's your take on ChatGPT and other LLMs?
A few things. I mean, the first thing is, I said, and I'll give you like a small example. I mean, we're using it in little ways in our business, right? Like, we get a bunch of information from our founders in about how their companies, we do we have to report every quarter to our LPs about what happens, right? And there's both the numbers, which ChatGPT can't help with, but there's the narrative of like, this happened, these deals were closed, these people were hired, etc. We kind of collect that, founders, kindly send that in. And then we put that into a report. Now, I used to do that manually, so I'd read all of the reports from the founders, and then I would translate that into a kind of summary. Now, we can kind of just dump all of that in and create a first version of the report, which is, 85-90% done, basically. So it's pretty cool. That's probably saved us. I mean, it's not like life-changing, but it's saved us a few hours. The interesting thing, though,
that's how a lot of it's going to be. A lot of people are going to build in these little utilities like that, and it's going to be lots of little touch points, I think, in workflow, which will co-pilot hours out of the day. But sorry, I interrupted you.
Which is meaningful. I mean, really meaningful. The only thing I sort of think when I think about tasks like that is it saves me time, but it makes me think less about what's going on in the portfolio, because I don't actually do that work myself, right? So, because I find it very helpful to kind of collect the information, work out what's important, and then translate that for our investors, right? And so I think that, I'm still trying to work out whether it's sort of how bad a thing it is that I'm not actually doing that myself, I mean, clearly
on that, I think that's a really good point. So what I find is that it enables me to work more like I would work with an analyst or an associate, where they can compile all the information, enabling me or allowing me to be more strategic and ask about where the gaps are. What are the big questions we haven't asked yet? Sometimes when you spend a lot of time in the weeds, sort of going through page after page, you can become a bit numb to all the detail.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I think that's actually really powerful. And it's definitely making me more productive. I would say where I have maybe a little bit of a concern is that there is some of this foundational work of learning how to spot gaps and think strategically that you get from initially doing a lot of the detailed work and going through all that stuff. And the next generation, if they grow up to never having to touch any detail, there's maybe a slight concern about whether they're going to lose some muscle memory or just some skill of how do you actually learn to spot these things if you've never done that.
Isn't this the same argument, Mads, though, that, I don't know, your maths teacher told you when calculators were invented? Isn't it?
Yeah,
isn't it the same?
And I would say, I think,
or writing to touching on glass.
Lots of people can't do mental arithmetic, and if you're in any kind of line of business and you can't do mental arithmetic and you're trying to have a negotiation, you're at a massive disadvantage. So getting those foundational skills in early on still have huge value, even with calculators and everything else.
Yeah.
So what's the future for LLMs? Where's it going? I don't know if this is what you were going to mention, but what do you think is the how's it going to unfold? You got any
Well, the
thoughts
beautiful
on that?
thing is we don't know. I mean, that's why it's so cool to kind of live in, invest in the space that we do. We don't know, and clearly the VCs don't know. They're playing, they're either making multiple bets or, the VCs have portfolios, right? So, yes, we talk about 150 billion valuation for OpenAI and 10 billion going into the company. But remember, that's going in a pref. So, it's like, it's actually 150 is the wrong way to think about it. And also, they have bets across a whole bunch of different things, right? So it's just part of the portfolio. So I don't think people really know, but clearly, we've come an insane, and if you kind of take the last 2 years and extrapolate that over the future, it's actually mind-boggling. And I was just thinking about it. Like you guys, we've been writing checks into machine learning AI, since 2015, 2016, right? And in 2 years now, I've got even got my 75-year-old aunt talking about AI. It's like that. It's just crazy. Yes. It's like,
yes,
and so I just think there's how far it's come in 2 years, and how much intelligent mind share is going into this now, and resource is it's pretty cool. But one thing that is for sure is that it's not going to be what a lot of people say it is or will be. People will get it wrong, I'm sure. And what we'll probably end up with
investors?
I think investors or speculators or futurists.
Yeah.
We're not going to have, AGI. I think is still a lot longer off than people say and think. I suspect, and maybe call me very high level on this. I think we'll end up with this kind of a really great co-pilot model with these LLMs,
yes.
And they will automate away, in the same way that software automated away very basic tasks. This will kind of automate away the next level of tasks, right? But you're still going to need humans up here, steering, pulling the strings.
I totally agree. I think I want to. We could talk about this all day, and I would love to. But I'm going to move on to a less happy, less successful story, which is Northolt. So this has obviously collapsed recently. They, I think I'm right in saying they took about $15 billion in investment, and then went on a bit of a spending spree, a bit of an expansion spree. So, Lomax, I don't know if you want to tee up what's happened with Northolt and since they've gone into administration, what's happening now?
I think at a high level, that's right. They raised 15 billion. They struggled commercially, and they struggled technically with their production line. Which sort of became this, it got into this kind of vicious death spiral, whereas they were sort of on the upward curve, and then a few bad things happened, and then contracts start getting lost, confident. You get in this kind of very negative spiral very, very quickly, right? And
it was a quick implosion. I remember them losing the $2 billion BMW contract, and I think I'm also right in saying they're even now about $6 billion in debt.
Yeah.
So they raised, and there's extra debt on top. But they're also talking about staying open and still managing their North American and Canadian offerings. So I don't know.
There's a different question here, which is more I think, having been through some bankruptcies myself, as an investor, the US is generally more benign in this respects and can allow organizations to carry on a kind of going concern basis, in the way that Europe's a bit more of a death knell for it. That's a separate conversation. But I think, which is also, it kind of reflects the kind of more entrepreneurial, have a swing at it kind of version of the US economy. Let's learn our lessons and keep going. I think it's very depressing, the Northolt situation. We had an opportunity to create a real European champion in this field. I think probably China throwing a bunch of government money into the space has not helped things at all. I think back in a smaller level to Tesla's near-death experience, right? And I know that was basically Elon who just pulled it out of the bag back when he did in 2010, 11. I'm not sure exactly when. That famous story.
Not with any government support, of course.
Yeah, that was not with government.
There was government support. There were government loans.
I was being sarcastic. I was being extremely sarcastic.
And the numbers there were a lot smaller, right? He was raising hundreds of millions, not billions. But in a way, I sort of feel. But we are 15 years later, right? With post-inflation and the numbers. All numbers are a bit bigger these days. But I'm just I kind of feel if this had been in the US, and it's easy for all of us to say bad things about Europe. But I just kind of, it makes me a little bit sad.
The shoulda, woulda, coulda.
I just risk capital in Europe is a problem, I think. Anyway, Mads, you have a view.
But it also begs the question: how much capital does one need? You can't get a business off the ground with 15 plus 6, right? That's your $21 billion euros of capital. I think that fundamentally this business had massive execution issues. They lost contracts because they couldn't deliver on time. I think if you build a startup you got to be either really great at tech execution and product, or you got to be really, really good at customer relationship management, and preferably both. And it seems like they weren't good at either. Right? I mean, Elon has had product delays so many times, but was always able to bring customers with him and get them excited and to prepay and keep the business afloat. Like, if you
But
can't
was that
do
the consumer
either,
side, Mads? Is that because, and obviously they started with sports cars. It was a very sexy thing. They made EVs sexy. How do you make batteries sexy? You can't. This was a couple of Tesla guys. These were Tesla, ex-Tesla founders that started Northolt.
I think it's easy to find excuses. Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. That's never been a secret. But he's also not said, look, the first rocket we're going to build is going to go straight to Mars. He has found ways to deliver business, to win contracts, to get revenue, to stay relevant.
Money. Oh, yeah, of course. I forgot the government money.
The government money, I think it was $400 million they got, post the financial crisis, when lots of other businesses got money as well, by the way, and where most of the others went bust and didn't pay it back, and actually Tesla did end up paying the money back. So, I think so many things to extract from this, but I think at the end of the day, the main lesson for me is, founders really matter. Management really matters. It's not enough to have a big market and throw lots of money at it. You also have to execute well. And when you don't, you can't win.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And by the way, like, no startup should become too big to fail. Like, no matter how important, like, no matter how, like, we can't have this notion. We had this conversation with Lilium in Germany, right, which also went bankrupt, where lots of people were astounded that the government didn't step in. I'm like, come on, no, this is not how free market capitalism works.
No, it can't be the same.
The flip side of it is we've got to become much better in Europe at doing exactly, Lomax, what you're saying, which is say, listen, it doesn't always work out. What are the lessons? And let's give it another go, right? Whereas sometimes we tend to see these failures as a little bit, terminal, which of course they shouldn't be. There are massive lessons coming out of this. Let's learn them. If there is not a single business that could come out of this, not a single technology that could be monetized, not a single thing, what a great failure that would be. There must be something that has been developed here that can then rise from the ashes. Like, for me, that is the beauty of capitalism.
Yeah.
Let's watch this space. Now, Lomax, we're going to quickly dip into. I feel like we're on a doom and gloom track here, but Recursion and ExScientia, what's going on here?
It was announced in August, but it finally closed last week, and this is the merger between basically two of the leading kind of AI for drug discovery companies that have grown in the last 10 years. Like, Recursion out of Salt Lake City has done phenomenally well at both raising capital, building a pipeline. So they're using AI both in lead generation, like in a kind of preclinical side of drug discovery, to try and reduce the costs, right? Because we've had this concept of the reverse Moore's law, which is called Eroom's law, right? People call it, sort of tongue in cheek, is the concept of bringing drugs to market has exponentially grown in the last 30-40 years. Some of it's mission sort of regulatory creep, like regulators have made it more expensive. Some of it's like we've already discovered the lower hanging fruit drugs. Like, now it's more complicated with biologics and more complex proteins and molecules. But that is a problem, and the AI for drug discovery platforms are trying to obviate that, right, by significantly reducing the costs of bringing these new drugs to market, right? And ExScientia was an amazing company that came out of Aberdeen and Oxford, and actually developed a really cool pipeline. Did a big deal with Bristol Myers Squibb, one of the big pharma companies. Got assets into the clinic in phase 1, started doing meaningful clinical trials, actually in solid tumors, and which is so irrelevant to me, but doesn't matter. Like, the point is, they were on, they raised 350 million, they got to a 2.5-3 billion market cap, and then they've kind of done a very soft landing, almost kind of merger with Recursion. I mean, I think it's a great deal for Recursion. It's just yet another example where we have a kind of US winner kind of sort of enveloping the European. But I mean,
absorbing into the Borg.
Exactly, had its specific challenges around the founder who got in trouble. But big picture, what happened? They raised 350 million. They basically exited for 500 million. I think when they had 600 million, they had 350 million of cash on the balance sheet when they exited, right? So the actual equity value is for all of the kind of everything and all the hype it's a bit of for the investors, it's a bit of a whimper, really. So
shame.
The company carries on.
Mads, you've got some details on this, Mads, haven't you? What else is going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, Lomax knows the company much better than I do, but Anthony Hopkins, there, who was the founder, he was sacked for inappropriate relationships with two staff members. And then the chairman, I think, sort of chose to handle it outside of the board, and they were both exited from the business. So the founder leaves, because also the CEO, the chairman leaves, and the business becomes a bit rudderless. And we know how important founders and business leaders are for these early stage loss making businesses. They need to keep funding themselves. They need to keep attracting talent. And if there's too much noise around them, you can't attract investors. You can't get the best talent to come join you, or competition can poach them. It becomes a bit rudderless, and things implode. Yeah, so I don't know enough about the detail to say whether, was it reasonable that he was kind of more or less thrown out of the business. The founder of Lomax, you may know more of that, but for sure, you've got a company like that. It can often be fatal to the business, even if some of the underlying things were good and have potential.
Yeah.
In the long term,
that should be de-risked from that kind of key man risk by the time it's become a $3.5 billion kind of market cap like company. But you're right, like. Maybe that is a good example where the founders still matter even at that late stage, right? Yeah,
It
you
feels
think about
like
how
that's quite
many...
excusey. That how many men are having inappropriate relationships right now in big tech or in big corporate? It feels like this is quite an excuse. I don't know. I don't know the detail. Psychedelics is back. Lomax, this is another one of yours on the docket.
yeah.
Well,
psychedelics. I mean, it's not
RFK is.
It's not. Okay.
Elon is a big psychedelics dude. So what's going on?
I wouldn't say it's back, but it has a chance of being back, right? So as a reminder, we're using like natural like psychedelic medicines there's been tons of research over the last 50, 60 years in this. Predominantly to be used in mental health, right? Indications like treatment, especially treatment-resistant depression, like PTSD, like a hugely
so this is the psilocybin, MDMA, these kind of psychedelics.
Psilocybin, MDMA, exactly, DMT, like all of these like naturally occurring molecules, right, which have been used by mankind for thousands of years and generations. And have gone through different waves of like over the last say 100 years of kind of waves of interest from healthcare professionals, for example, and we went through a last kind of boom in the last 4 years where you actually have like biotech companies that are taking these assets through clinical trials now. The sort of the industry died. There's almost been this big experiment with psychedelics in the last 5-6 years where tons of money went into it, say a few billion went into the industry to get these clinical trials started, and then we had the first major moment this year in August where Lycos, which is one of the big players in the space, actually got to a phase 3 clinical trial, or got to an FDA approval, having delivered 2 very solid phase 3, like the final stage of clinical trial readouts, and then they got rejected by the FDA. So everyone's like, oh no, psychedelics is dead again, another winter, another 20 years.
Is it a labeling problem? Is it labeling? Because the problem I always have with these things, I remember my mum being in hospital years ago and she was taking codeine. So I did some research into what codeine was and how codeine works. I was intrigued, and it's opiate based. So, slightly problematic with regards to addictiveness, because my mum's an ex-alcoholic, ex-drug addict. So I was quite concerned, and sure as hell she got addicted to codeine. But it just feels like a labeling problem. Because if we didn't call them psychedelics, if we didn't have an experience of MDMA or ecstasy or know what magic mushrooms were, is that the challenge?
Yeah, I think there's a big labeling PR problem, and of course, and that's why sort of ironically, you'd always imagine that the right right side of politics would be more resistant to this, and the left side might be more progressive and open to it, especially if the data shows that that actually you can make meaningful effect within patients of these conditions, for which the existing drugs are useless, by the way, right? But actually now, why I think I added this to the docket is that RFK, who Trump's brought in to run health, is actually
who wasn't a Republican, like Donald Trump wasn't a Republican, like Elon Musk wasn't a Republican, like Vivek Ramsey wasn't a Republican. So let's start with a bunch of Democrats recreating a third party. Let's start there.
Or whatever flag or label you want to give them. Like, he's actually quite open towards this. So what will that mean? That might mean that the Lycos decision at the FDA level gets reviewed, and that would actually open the way for a bit more interest in the space. I mean, Bright Minds Bioscience, which is a Canadian company, went up 100x in 2 days. 100x listed company, absolutely crazy. which is relevant for Europe because, two of the biggest listed players in the space, originally tech startups, Compass Pathways and Atai, are both European companies, right? Now, their share price is in the doldrums now, but if this all picks up, and this is not investment advice, categorically not, it could be a bit of a rebirth for the space. And then we all know what happens when public market interest picks up, that backs down into the private markets, and the private markets, you get more interest at the seed and Series A level again. So watch this space.
Mads, you got any thoughts on psychedelics or anything in this space?
Not really, other than that I've followed the discussion with interest, and especially this thing that people have talked a lot around over the last year, which is that founders, are made of special stuff, and you have to have your head sort of put on in a certain way, I think, to go out and try and take on the world and go through all the pain and suffering you have to go through to build a company. And there's been a lot of discussion in Silicon Valley around kind of this emerging self-discovery through psychedelics, ayahuasca and other things. And how many founders have gone down that route of self-discovery, come out on the other side, and actually found that, look, maybe they weren't just, were no longer as driven to go and build that global company as they were before, and they just didn't care as much about that. And so I think Mark Andreessen said we've lost more founders to psychedelic self-discovery than anything else, which
So stay mental, founders. Stay broken. Don't go to the therapist chair.
Yeah.
Don't do any ayahuasca ceremonies. Stay broken and build global. Is that what we're saying?
That's a really good point, Mads. Although what I would say is when I was talking about these companies, they are focused on people like with real like PTSD or treatment of resistant depression.
Yeah,
Those
so
are real. These aren't just founders with like founders with some like mummy or daddy issues or something. This is like proper kind of major like majorly depressed and clinically in trouble
broken
people,
trauma.
Right? Yeah. Well, what's the lesson then, Mads? If you see a founder off to an ayahuasca ceremony, run a mile. Like, run a mile.
I think it raises all sorts of questions for us as an industry that we'll have to analyze carefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a whole podcast in itself. Gentlemen, we've run out of time. We had so much left to do.
Can we say one more thing? I think it's
time.
worth saying because I don't. Yeah, we talked about Northolt, we talked about ExScientia, but Cradle Bio raised 75 million, which is a 2-year-old.
Yeah, let's end on a high. Let's end on a high. Boom.
These guys
Big
did
Series
seed
B, right?
2 years ago. I actually think we missed the deal.
Yeah.
So whoops. But
oops.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Cradle have now raised 100 million. They just raised a 75 million Series B. They're doing, they're ex-Google guys using AI for protein design and enzyme engineering or enzymes. It's very, very cool. And it's great that you can do that in Europe because, raising tens of millions of dollars for a largely pre-commercial company. I mean, that company is in market, but it's not going to be based on a revenue multiple basis, valued on a revenue. It's like, that is very cool. So, hallelujah for that. And long may that continue.
Boom. I love ending on a high. Thank you for that. Not psychedelic high, but we'll go with that one. Cheers, gents. See you next week.